We're going to do something a little different this time. This is a Ford Pinto based modified stock car, and it supposedly has a Ford engine in it, so it fits in my parameters of building Ford model kits. I was looking for something a little bit unusual to do, and I have a contest or a challenge coming up that's going to be for roundy round cars. So instead of doing the usual NASCAR thing like everybody else is doing, I decided to go with this one. There's a couple builds on these already on YouTube, so I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail with the unboxing. We'll whip through that really quick, and then I'll just move on to the build. Well, the first thing that strikes me is how empty the box is. There's not a whole lot in here. Well, at least it looks that way. There's 4 tires, and they have the Tampa printed white lettering on there, which is great. We got the Pinto body. It's an early Pinto with the little taillights. And bag of parts. Interesting. And another big bag of parts, which is the chassis stuff. And then we got decals and instructions. Okay. So, the box didn't look like there was much in it, but that should be everything. And this has got a kind of a specialized quick change rear axle in it. It looked like they had a really nice chassis, and watching some of the other people do the builds on them. So I'm kind of looking forward to this. This is supposedly a 428 engine. I'm going to have to do a little homework on that and see if it's legit or if it's just a generic big block V8. But blissfully, no chrome parts to dechrome. This is wonderful. I get to just start painting. Fabulous. So I'm not going to do the red, white, and blue scheme. I'm going to do my own thing with that. And you'll note that there are 4 different versions of this. And if you're a Ford guy, the bottom left, the blue car called the Slammer, that's a Ford also. The Rat Trap is a Vega, and the other one's a Chevy Coupe. And we have a finished product. Let's go over this thing quickly, and I'll give you some highs and lows on it. First, we'll do a little spin here so you can see what it looks like from every angle. I tried to source the history on this kit from ScaleMates, and they really didn't have much history on this. I'm not sure when it came out. I want to say it was probably the late 70s, maybe the early 80s. It's been reissued and reboxed several times. Sometimes it's turned up as an AMT kit, but it is originally an MPC tool. And you can tell because it's got ejector pin marks everywhere. Fortunately, most of them don't show because of the way the molds are made. They hid them on the underside of a lot of things, which is good. But you'll see some pin marks there in the front. And there's some here in the rear deck. Those are the most obvious ones, but the roll bars got them in just about every part, multiple places. So this kit, I believe the chassis are shared between all 4 of the choices there. And the only differences are going to be the body and the hood and a couple other trim items. The engine, I'm pretty certain, is also the same in every kit. And I want to talk about that a little bit. This kit is supposed to have, I believe, a Ford engine because it's supposed to have a 428, which would be an FE. But the engine clearly is not. And I'm going to take the hood off of here if it wants to cooperate. So the engine, it's supposed to be a big block. It's got 4-bolt valve covers, which would indicate a Chevy. And the intake manifold comes molded with a distributor hole in the rear, which would also be a Chevy. The instructions have you put the distributor very vaguely pointing in the front somewhere, and I don't know where you're supposed to stick it. What I did was I took the the intake manifold and flipped it around, you have to cut the mounting tab off the top of the engine block to do that, but it fits perfectly backwards, and then you have a hole to mount the distributor here in the front. So you can fake it being a Ford engine that way, but if you're a serious modeler and want to duplicate something real, you're going to have to put a different engine in this thing to make it truly a Ford. The kit goes together surprisingly well for the most part. All of the mount tabs and pins and holes are all where they should be. All of this little piping and suspension mounting all lines up where it's supposed to be. It's very, very small glue areas though. This is a finicky little kit to put together, and I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner. I think you're going to struggle with it. It's a kit that probably should have a lot of ACC or super glue used to put it together. I don't have any handy, and so I used regular old Faller model glue and my favorite micro crystal clear, which I used for a few things. But some of these mounting parts or points are very, very small, and I'm going to show you one here right now as we look at the underside. All right, here's our undercarriage, and the mounting points I'm talking about that are really difficult. The rear leaf springs have these tiny little pins that go through tiny little holes. Very, very little glue area. I added some crystal clear on top of my model cement to try to hold those in place, and it seems to be working, but not an easy thing to do. As soon as you start putting the axle and the tires and wheels on there, it's a lot of weight. This is definitely a model that's going to remain a static model its entire life. You're not going to want to move it around very much. The rear axle also just sits on leaf springs and gets glued there. That's a little fussy to get glued correctly as well. And some of these other pieces were somewhat difficult, but the front suspension, for example, that fits in perfectly. I mean, that was a slam dunk. Every mounting point lined up 100%. There was no shuffle anything around. It all worked out great. Another point on the engine, it's kind of a curious thing. They give us a separate oil filter and housing to go on there, but they mold the starter into the block. I don't get that. Plus, it's not even in line with the hump and the bell housing. So this engine, while it's got some nice detail with the bolt heads and stuff on the oil pan there, it's not great. I think you could easily substitute another engine in there and have a much nicer kit. But the rest of the chassis looks pretty good. The floor pan, which I had a feeling was not going to fit very well, actually fit pretty nice. You see more ejector pin holes, divots throughout. It's got this quick change rear end. The funny thing about that is the box calls it, well, first of all, it says Franklin front end. What they were trying to say was it was the rear end that they were trying to refer to, and it's not called a Franklin. It's called a something else. Franken, or I forget what it is. Again, I'm not an expert on modified stockers, but there's a special kind of rear that's what that is, that has this quick change cover. And they not only got the position wrong, but they got the name wrong on the box art. But it is actually an accurate type rear for this car. The chassis, I don't know what that's supposed to be. I guess it's just a generic modified racer chassis. One place I read they thought it was a Tobias, but every picture I've looked at of a Tobias chassis, it's not that. Some other guy had posted on a forum that he thought it was a 50s Chevy frame, but I don't see it looking like any 50s Chevy frame I've ever seen. So I don't think it's actually modeled after a particular car. So it's probably custom built frame in a shop someplace. Ironically, Tobias race cars is about 20 minutes away from me. And we're going to flip him back over again and do a little work with the interior. Okay, so the interior. It's a typical race car interior. There's not a whole lot of detail in a way, but they also do have some detail in here. They give you a fire extinguisher, separate shifter. The pedals are all separate. The gas pedal mounts to the floor. The other pedals hang. The steering wheel is pretty much just a generic racing steering wheel. The gauges are made into the instrument panel there, and we'll talk about that in a second. The seat has harnesses and buckles molded in. And of course there is a roll cage. And the roll cage is a real thrill to put together. It's very small tubes. There's a lot of junctions. The pins are tiny. The holes are tiny. And you need 3 or 4 hands to be able to put the thing together. Plus, because you want to get it square enough that it fits into the pre-made holes in the floor pan. And when you do that, and you put everything together and you have the seat in the right position, there is one major flaw. I don't know if we'll be able to see it looking through the back window here, but yeah, you can. Notice that the steering wheel, let's see if I can get closer for you. Notice the offset of the steering wheel to the seat. It's really bad. Let's try looking at it from the front. So there's the steering wheel and the seat arrangement. And the problem is not the seat. The seat really can only be mounted in one place. The problem is where the steering column and dashboard is mounted on the roll cage. So what you would want to do if you build this after watching this video is you want to cut that dash panel off, because you're going to have to shift it over to the left. You can't just shorten or try to extend the roll bar. That's going to be very difficult to do. So I would just cut that panel off the tube, slide it down to the left to the driver's side, and then glue it on where it's going to be centered in front of the seat. I also found that the roll cage wouldn't quite go together around the seat. It actually hits on this side. So this back joint here, if I can get my finger in there to show you where it is, right in here, this joint here didn't line up. So I had to use some thick glue to fill that in and then paint it. So that was the biggest fit issue with building this kit. Other than that, things fit really well. One other notable exception, and this may be because of lack of pre-fit or what have you on my part, but the headers, which are pretty striking, kind of dig on those. They don't really mount in a specific location on the cylinder heads. So you're kind of left guessing. And you want to do these probably last or almost last in your assembly. And trying to get them to the right height where they're not hitting the frame and all that is a little difficult. So I got those on and I thought, wow, I have everything doing wonderful here. I mean, this one's a little too close to the body, but so be it. Then the last parts I put on were these side Nerf bars. And at the front, they're supposed to go from, this bar here is supposed to go all the way over and attach to the frame. Well, where I have my headers mounted, that ain't happening. As you can clearly see, I'm almost right up against it here. And on the other side, it's a little bit better. So again, if you follow behind me and you build this kit yourself, this is something to watch out for ahead of time. What I did was I just cut the ends of those bars off, and instead of making them run to the frame, I just had them stop there at the headers. Real life effectiveness certainly diminished, but for the purposes of finishing the kit and making myself happy enough, that's where I wound up with. So that's going to be a glaring error on my kit compared to how this thing's supposed to be made. You may not like that look. Maybe I should have just cut them off here back towards the door farther. You know, that's my only real major flaw in this as far as my construction of it, in my opinion. One other thing that does not fit. The air cleaner does not fit on the carburetor. It is way too big on its base, the opening of the base, and it actually winds up getting glued to the end bowls on the carbs, not on the top of the carburetor itself. I mean, you can glue it on there and it'll be okay, but it doesn't fit properly. I don't know what that air cleaner actually is supposed to be for, but it doesn't fit that carburetor. The front bumper, I'm not clear exactly on how that's supposed to mount. I tried it upside down and back and forth, and There's two little tabs here on the top of the frame that maybe indicate that it's supposed to go there, but it didn't look right there. So I just glued it to the face of the frame, and the back one just gets glued to the back of the rear body there, but you can see it hits the quarter panels on both sides. So those are probably the only other issues I would have with fit on it. There are mold lines here in the C-pillars. I did do some sanding. They're better than they were when it came out of the box, but certainly could have done more work there if you're a real picky builder. The number decals are the ones from the kit, and I will give round 2 some credit here on decals. Their decals work beautifully. They're nice and sturdy. They slide off nice. They're very easy to work with. The sponsor decals, other than the Lakewood ones in the back, I put these on from the 73 Mach 1 Mustang kit I had, just to make something different. These cars, in looking at photos of them from the period that they raced in, very few had a lot of sponsor decals. So these things don't get plastered up like most of your stock cars would today. You can put more on. There were a couple guys that had some pretty extensive graphics, but most of them were pretty simple. So I kept it simple myself and wound up with a very clean looking car. The paint color, if anybody's asking, is Tamiya. It's a green. I'm sure, sorry I don't have it here to tell you what exactly the color is. But it came out of the can this way. It does not have any extra clear on it. It is a little maybe flatter than I would like it to be, so probably adding a clear coat to get a little more gloss would be helpful. The headers are flat white. This is a little fiddly to get on, but once it's on, it fits really well. But these pins are a little difficult. There we go. And you can see the hood doesn't quite go on straight, and the problem there is more in the radiator support up here. And it fits in its mounting position exactly looks like it should, so I'm not sure why it's off in relationship to everything else. It looks like it's twisted a little bit. It's not the body, because all these tubular frame pieces are in their correct positions too, so somewhat of a puzzle. That's pretty much it. It's a fun kit to build, but it's more complex than I was expecting. I thought this would be fairly simple, and you wind up having to do quite a bit of work to do it. It's one of these kits that you glue some of it together, let it dry overnight. Glue some of it together, let it dry overnight. It's not one that goes together really quickly, but when it's finished, you get a nice car out of it. I wound up with one piece left over. It looks like a crossbar for the roll bar. The instructions make no mention of this part at all. And I actually had the roll cage together and mounted before I remembered that I still had this laying in the box. So I don't know where it's supposed to go or if it's supposed to go, but be aware of that as you're building this too. But for an MPC kit, I always say that as my disclaimer, for an MPC kit, it's pretty nice. It has some flaws. It does show that it's a slightly older tool, but ultimately you wind up with a nice little modified stock car. So any of those kits shown here on the end of the box are going to be basically the same kit. The body's going to be different, the hood's going to be different, the intake systems are variable, but I believe the wheels, tires, and everything else is absolutely identical from one to the other. So collect all four, as they say in the box art, or just enjoy building one. Although it's not really a Ford. And with that, I'll leave you to get back to your workbenches. Thanks for watching. Please check out my other videos for more Ford builds.